despite the fact that we have evidence that most of it is true and a little bit of common sense for the stuff that we don't have the hard proof, a lot of Jets fans seem upset about this Dianna Russini report. I'm Glenn Naughton with JetNation Radio and JetNation.com. Be sure to log into JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. And we'll be talking about that too, the message boards at JetNation.com. So, a few days late on this, we did talk about this the other night on our show on Jet Nation Live. Myself, Chris Schubert, Dylan Terraman talked about the Dianna Russini report, and Zack Rosenblatt, of course, both of The Athletic. And listen, I get that it was a damning report, and I get that some fans by nature want to defend the team and don't want anyone saying anything negative. But, A, it's the job of reporters to report if they find significant stories. And a lot of the things that fans are upset by, the things that were said in the story, it's shocking to me because whether we like it or not, we have actual real-world proof that what she's saying is at least deeply rooted in facts. And now if you want to say she embellished or made stuff up, you or I have no evidence of that. But we do have evidence of the origins of these accusations being accurate. So what am I talking about? Well, let's talk about the most damning accusations in the report, okay? The first one, to me anyway, is the Nathaniel Hackett not meeting with his coaches until late in the week. Basically, he's not preparing. Quoted one source as saying that this preseason with the Jets, they never saw a coach watch less film to get ready for a season. Does anyone think that sounds like a lie? Does anyone think, oh, I can't believe they suggested Nathaniel Hackett doesn't watch film? Nathaniel Hackett himself, and I ranted about this for a few days after he said it. I've mentioned it several times since then because it's so maddening and so ridiculous. The offensive coordinator himself came out and said, I didn't know until mid-season that Breece Hall was a weapon out of the backfield as a receiver. That is a flat-out admission that I do not watch film. You had countless examples of him doing it in college. You had plenty of examples of him doing it the previous season in the NFL. And you walk through the door halfway or late in this season, Breece Hall year number 2, and you openly admit, I didn't know he could do that. How? The only way, there is only one way for anyone, coordinator, fan, opponent, the only way anyone would not know that about Breece Hall would be for that person to have not watched any film of Breece Hall. He admitted it. And now, all Russini does is go a little deeper and find out not only is he being criticized for not watching film, which we know because he verified, but he's not meeting with his coaches either until late in the week. Very believable. For a guy who's not watching film, are we supposed to believe that in other aspects of his job, he's a real go-getter? Does this football team on offense look like a team that spends a lot of time preparing? No. So there's not one single realistic reason to believe that what Russini says there is false. And I have no thoughts on her. Good, bad, otherwise. I know she's a lady who doesn't like Aaron Rodgers because he made her look bad. Okay, fine. They can both be true. Maybe she hates Aaron Rodgers. Maybe that's why she wanted to write the story. Doesn't make the story false. Doesn't make the story unimportant. It's important to know that coaches aren't doing their jobs. And everything about Nathaniel Hackett tells us he's probably that type of guy. She goes in the building, gets quotes from people telling us, we as fans have said all year that he was terrible at his job. Now you just get confirmation from within the building, people saying something's got to change. I would imagine, and I'm just guessing here, but isn't it weird that, within a week or two of this story coming out, you see 2 Jets coaches get fired and the Jets part ways with Rex Hogan? So you can chalk that up to a coincidence if you like, but Robert Salah, as we've seen, is not a guy who fires guys for failing. It doesn't matter if you're LaFleur, who you only get fired because the owner makes you do it. It doesn't matter if you're Hackett. Failure isn't a thing that gets you fired under Robert Salah. And certainly, I think we could all agree that the running backs coach and the wide receivers coach weren't the reasons this team wasn't good last year. So that's the first aspect. Nathaniel Hackett doesn't watch film. Nathaniel Hackett let us know he doesn't watch film. And I know there are those who disagree and think, oh, he was just speaking off the cuff. He literally gave you the week of the year that he first realized Breece Hall can catch the football out of the backfield. Oh, yeah, it was week with 7, 8, whatever week it was. Yeah, it was against the Giants. He literally told the press, I didn't know he could do that. Now, Nate, when did you realize he could do that? Against the Giants. When I saw him do that, I thought, oh, wow, this guy can catch the ball. So, again, to come out and say, oh, these accusations that Nate Hackett doesn't watch film. Nate Hackett told you he doesn't watch film. The next one, Robert Salah. I've seen people say there's no way Salah did that with compiling the list of coaches who played well with their quarterbacks and which head coaches had a good record with their backup quarterbacks. This was another accusation in the Russini report. And I've seen some Jets fans come out against it and say, I don't believe that. There's no way Salah did that. Joe Benigno, one of Robert Salah's best friends, told us this a couple of months ago. Remember that story? Apparently not. Some people have forgotten. Joe Benigno, friend of Robert Salah, went on the air with WFAN a couple of months ago with Tiki and whatever the other guy is. And he says, Salah messaged me with the names of the coaches who have fared well with their backup quarterbacks. So this is, again, we know this was happening. And the next day he goes on the air and says, yeah, Robert called me, we talked for 25 minutes last night to smooth things over. Like that friendship apparently means a lot to Robert Salah. He'd rather repair his Benigno friendship than work on the upcoming Bills game that week. So this is a thing that was already known. Again, Russini adds a little bit to it and says Salah was showing people a list. Like this, he was compiling this not just for media types, not just for his friends, but like coaches in the building, like people. He wanted them to know that, look, we're failing without a quarterback, but a lot of people do. And honestly, I don't have a problem with that. What he's saying is true. I'm not going to get mad at Robert Salah for living in reality and knowing how unbelievably difficult it is to win with your QB2. My problem is taking the time to try to convince other people and media types and outsiders. Be aware of something, fine, but just move forward and don't stop to remind everyone. Like, the smart people are going to figure it out. When you have to dig up stats to show them, like, look, Andy Reid isn't as good without Patrick Mahomes. Who needs to be told that? What if there are fans out there who think that you should be just as good with your backup quarterback as you are with your starting quarterback? Those people aren't worth talking to or convincing. I've said that before. That's why the next man up mentality is so ridiculous. And I've said before, I get it for people in the building, in the huddle. You've got to work with that mentality. You've got to move forward and operate as if you still have everyone in place because you've still got to play the games and you still have to try to win. But for anyone who doesn't acknowledge the fact that winning becomes infinitely more difficult when you go from Aaron Rodgers to Zack Wilson, don't even bother trying to convince those people. They're living in an alternate reality. Anyone who says next man up, doesn't matter if it's Aaron or Zack, you got to make the playoffs, that's not reality. So for Robert Salah to take any of his extra time to dig up the research to try to convince people who don't understand that Aaron Rodgers is better than Zack Wilson, why are you talking to them? Just stop. Move forward. Don't worry about the excuses. Try to win football games. Like I said, you're aware of it, fine. But you don't have to take the time to share it with everybody. Joe Douglas, neutered as a GM according to the Russini report, per one AFC executive who said Aaron Rodgers isn't the assistant GM. Joe Douglas is the assistant GM. A little bit hyperbolic, I get it, but as every fan on the planet, well, I shouldn't say every fan. I've encountered a few people, and I'm not making this up, I truly mean this. I've encountered people who believe that Joe Douglas on his own wanted all those Packers players that were brought in to help Rodgers. There are people who, again, not many, it's almost not worth mentioning. It's probably a handful of fans, if that. But there are a very small number of people who believe that Joe Douglas, that Randall Cobb was one of his targets entering free agency. That Dalvin Cook, that Joe Douglas wanted to pay $7 or $8 million for the corpse of Dalvin Cook. We saw Aaron Rodgers, yucking it up with him in training camp. Rodgers wanted him there. Rodgers wanted Cobb there. Rodgers wanted Turner there. All these guys who were washed up or never good to begin with were Rodgers and or Hackett to a degree, or Hackett guys. And Joe Douglas brought them in to make them happy. So as this, a point we made on the show the other day, it's time for Joe Douglas to reclaim his position as the general manager and say, look, Aaron, love you. Glad you're here. You want to send me a list of guys you like? Fine, but I'm making no promises. I'm not going to spend whatever it costs to bring in David Bakhtiari to start 2 games for us. I'm not going to go out and bring in every free agent who you know from around the league, who you play golf with. Phenomenal. Glad you're a popular guy, but I'm the GM. I have to assemble the roster. I have 1 to 2 years to make something happen with you being Aaron Rodgers, as my quarterback. And I'm going to bring in the best players to get that done. We're not going to do what we did last year, where I bring in the first 45, 46 guys, and you pick the rest. And I throw away 5, 6 roster spots. Not going to happen. That's what Joe Douglas needs to do this year. Will he? Remains to be seen. That was probably the most positive thing from the article, was Aaron Rodgers apparently being okay with bringing in another offensive consultant. And I actually had that thought last year. When things were going as poorly as they were, I can't recall if I said it on the show or not, but I remember thinking things may actually be bad enough that Rodgers won't have a leg to stand on if they want to make some type of adjustment to the offensive staff. You can't look at the way this team performed if you're Aaron Rodgers and push back and say, no, we don't need anybody else. My guy Hack's got this. I'm going to have him watch film this year even. You can't do that. Doesn't matter who you are, you cannot look at the way this team performed and say, we don't need help. So maybe it's a good thing that Hackett was bad enough that, fine, if you're going to be here, Hackett, at least be bad enough that your best friend can't defend you and the team can say, look, we're bringing another guy in. Now, are they going to bring in another friend of Aaron? Are they going to bring in someone who loves him and Hack, and it's going to be like, another golfing buddy? We don't know. Time will tell. But the Russini report, Russini, Rosenblatt, got to mention Zack too. He worked on it, and they wrote what they wrote. There's not a single thing in there that I read and say, oh, that doesn't really jive. I don't see where Hackett wouldn't be game planning. I don't think that there's any evidence Robert Salah is compiling records to share with people. Benigno is Buddy Joe. Let everybody know. And the other part of the report, again, this speaks to Hackett. Does anyone believe? We were told that Keith Carter was upset because Hackett wouldn't give Dwayne Brown any help against Micah Parsons. How many Jets fans, about 10 minutes into that game probably, were screaming to get Dwayne Brown some help? Every fan watching the game knew it. You don't think the offensive line coach was pulling his hair out and thinking, can we please give my guy some help? I 1,000,000% believe he wanted help for Dwayne Brown. I 1,000,000% believe he said, get Dwayne Brown some help. And apparently, we watched it unfold. Hackett didn't give Brown any help. And so if we as Jets fans are yelling and screaming, and I'm sure the broadcast probably mentioned it, basically the only person aware of that football game being played who didn't think Dwayne Brown needed help was Nate Hackett. So these are the things in the story. Feel free to comment, put in the YouTube comments. Let me know what aspect of that Russini story doesn't seem believable to you. That Salah didn't compile a list, which we know he did. That Hackett didn't watch film, which we know he didn't. That Joe Douglas didn't lose some power as a GM, which he obviously did. Or that the offensive line wasn't asking for extra help from Hackett. Do we believe that the offensive staff was sitting there watching that game and thinking, yeah, Dwayne Brown is fine. We don't need it. We don't need a tight end or a jumbo. We don't need to throw another tackle in there to give him a hand. He's good. Gave up 1 million quarterback hits. So every single thing, this is the problem. People are taking their personal feelings toward Dianna Russini and acting as if them disliking her makes the story inaccurate or incorrect. Nothing in that story is surprising. And as many people have said to me, we knew everything in that story already. Not entirely true. We knew some, but again, the story just brought us a little bit deeper and gave us a little more detail and showed us that it's actually worse than many of us believed it was. So it's ugly, but sometimes, as they say, you got to be willing to call a baby ugly. If it's ugly, it's ugly. And right now, the Jets front office is an ugly baby. So is it going to get fixed? We'll see. But don't allow emotions to override logic and force you to take a story that appears to be overwhelmingly credible and say, well, that can't be true because she doesn't like him. All credible stuff from everything we've seen and heard from the team. Getting back to Aaron Rodgers, did a story on JetNation.com. It's on the front page. I'm a little bit surprised, and it's not. I think most people get it, but there are people who you can lay out very basic, simple things, and it causes some confusion. So the story was that the Jets aren't done paying for Aaron Rodgers yet. And they're not. And I don't even mean the financial piece. We know those mega cap hits are coming in the next few years, and it's going to hinder this team's ability to add talent. But there's the fact that the Jets gave up their second rounder to get Aaron Rodgers as part of the deal. That you traded Elijah Moore in a 3, and you get back the 2, and you trade the 2. Now, and I think the reason why I was harping on this is because sitting down here in Mobile, watching the talent in this class, especially the O-line talent, where the Jets have so much of a need, that I'm sitting there watching and thinking, damn, this team, they really need that second rounder back. That top 50 pick, whatever you need. They either need a late one or an early 2 or something because of giving that pickup for Rodgers. The New York Jets cannot pick at 10 and 72. They can't let that happen. And if they do, it's another blemish on Joe Douglas's record. So while the Jets traded for Rodgers and they gave up what they gave up, and yes, the deal itself is done. Well, it's not done because the Packers haven't used that second round pick. That's when the deal really is done, when the Jets don't make that pick. But the Jets now have to maneuver or pivot and find a way to get another pick because of the Rodgers pick they gave up. So that's called a domino effect. When one thing happens and it causes another thing to happen, and it usually applies to things that are negative. I looked up I Googled the definition. I put it on the forums at JetNation for the people having a hard time with it. But when you do something and then it creates a circumstance that forces you to do something else, and those things are bad, that's called a domino effect. So like bad thing, bad thing, bad thing. So the bad thing was, and I said this from day one, I got killed for it, don't care. The bad thing was the Jets overpaid for Aaron Rodgers initially, because they were the only buyer. And we said that at the time, and now since that, whether it's Albert Breer, Connor Hughes, everyone who got the behind-the-scenes stuff confirmed the Jets were the only buyer. And they still gave up these premium picks. So you've traded the 2 for Aaron Rodgers. You have a need on the offensive line because of AVT's injuries, because of Mekhi Becton's injuries, because Laken Tomlinson hasn't been very good. You have Tippmann coming back, which is very nice. You have Carter Warren, who is a question mark, might be a starter. So maybe you have 2 starting offensive linemen. Don't know what you're getting from AVT if he's going to be healthy. It's very frustrating. So I get it. So the Jets still have to address offensive line. So because you gave up that 2 to get Aaron Rodgers, you now have to make another move, or should be working to make another move to add a pick because of the one you lost. So that's like the domino. The one hits the other, and now you've got to make that trade. So while it's not a move that directly brings you Aaron Rodgers because you've already got him, it's a domino effect, and you're continuing to pay for that trade. So I hope that helps. As I said, I put an article on Jet Nation, and there seemed to be some folks who were really like, what does this mean? We already made the trade. The trade is over. Right. But one thing can lead to another, and what that trade is leading to is the Jets not having a pick between 10 and 72, so they really need to be aggressive and make this happen. I'd be shocked if Joe Douglas doesn't. I mean, Joe Douglas himself has said, we have to win more games. Well, how do you win more games? You add more talent. And I believe Joe Douglas understands what he's saying there is we need to win more games this year. Like, I'm not going to keep getting chance after chance after chance. And if we don't win some football games and make the playoffs, him and Salah could be gone. I think Salah needs to go before Douglas. Douglas has at least brought in some talented players. I don't know what Salah has done that would justify him staying around. And that, that'll be another show for another time. But we've talked about it. How many players have we seen leave Robert Salah's coaching staff and play better elsewhere? So it's, was Morgan Moses not good? Was George Fant not good? Was even you look at Elijah Moore and look at the numbers he's put up in Cleveland, career high in receiving yards last year. He couldn't get a target with the Jets. So again, I think the Jets have had some talented players. The Jets have talented players. Like, there's no getting around that, right? Joe Tippmann was just an all-rookie guy. We've seen, let's hold off on Izzy Abanikanda. He hasn't shown enough, but he is going to be a guy who fills a very important role for this team. Then, of course, you've got Sauce, you've got Garrett, you've got JJ, you've got Michael Carter II. A young guy who's come, not, I guess you probably can't say he's young anymore, but Jamian Sherwood is a guy who's really coming on. Elijah Vera Tucker, another, injuries have been an issue, but the Jets have talent. It's just the talent hasn't played to its full potential, that's on the coaches. The GM doesn't draw up the scheme and develop the players. That's on the coaching staff. But getting back to my point, Joe Douglas knows they've got to win some football games soon. So it would be silly of him to not add any picks between 10 and 72 this year and keep his picks for next year that he would never get to use, or to at least not trade down in this year's draft to add a pick between 10 and 72. The Rodgers deal look, the Jets are going to be paying for that deal for years, right? This year they're paying for it and not having a second round pick, and in subsequent years they're going to be paying for it with huge cap hits for a guy who's no longer on the roster. It is what it is. Deal's been made. No use complaining about, the future money, because it's unavoidable. But as far as the loss of the draft pick that they don't have this year, they can still do something this year about it to bring those picks back. Not, you know what I mean, not bring them back, but to add picks that they don't have that they do need. Because there's some good linemen in this draft, folks. Tackles, interior, there are some guys, some day one plug-and-play guys. We talked about it throughout the week. Check out our Senior Bowl recaps or Senior Bowl practice recaps with myself and Dylan Terraman. Some really impressive guys on the inside, outside. There are opportunities to improve this offensive line significantly and quickly. The Jets are just going to need the picks to do it. So that'll do it for this one. Hope it helped breaking it down and pointing out. I'm just a little surprised people seem to have forgotten real world things that were said that confirm that what Russini and Rosenblatt said were true. And less emotion, more factual analysis. Don't let your heart get in the way of your brain. Have a good one, Jets fans.